Welcome back. I'm Eric.
And I'm Kevin, and this is Exploring Whiskey, where we explore whiskeys from around the world.
You're probably wondering why we have blazers on today. A little more sophisticated look than the previous videos, but Kevin and I are the member of the 12 Gentlemen Whiskey Club. And today we are going to be sampling some spirits that we had sampled at our last chapter meeting.
So the very first whiskey we started off with was Macallan 12. This is a 12-year-old scotch from the Speyside region. A lot of people think scotch and think that's super smoky. That's a different region, and we'll get to that at another point. This is more of a sweeter, fruity type scotch, a little bit lighter. It's aged in a sherry oak cask, so that is going to add a little bit more of the fruit notes to it. In America, bottled at 86 proof. Around the rest of the world, for whatever reason, it's bottled at 80 proof. Obviously, 12 years. It's a very interesting, Macallan is a very interesting scotch. There's so many different varieties, also including some of the most expensive bottles to ever be sold. Thought that was interesting as I was reading up on that. We don't have the bottle, but we do have our samples left over. Immediately off the nose is the fruit, the plums, the soup. It's a very sweet smell. It's a very fruity smell. I
think most people, when they think of scotches, they immediately get drawn to those, the very peaty, where it's that very smoky, but this is, to the nose, very smooth.
Yeah, it's super light.
That single malt is very smooth.
Yes, yes. Let's see. It's really light in color, which makes sense. They do use used barrels, so they're not going to pick up the char that a lot of the American whiskeys and bourbons will pick up. So it's going to be a little bit lighter. A little oily. Just
a little bit.
There.
It's not. Doesn't have the legs as some of the bourbons do, though.
Plum note, that fruit note is super strong on that initial nose.
Give it a whirl for the second time.
That's nice. Really light.
Very light, very smooth.
Super smooth. You do get there's a little spice at the very end on that. But really light, real fruity, very, very just a soft, very soft palate to that. Definitely that fruit note, the plum, the sweetness that you're getting off of that.
A little bit of cinnamon.
Yeah, there's something. There's a little bit of a spice, a little baking spice. Almost a hint of smoke, but not anything like you'd think from a scotch.
As a newbie to scotch, and I say newbie, really starting to get to them in the last couple of months, like this is such such an easy drinker for me. Yeah,
this is easily something.
That'd be my recommendation.
Neat, totally neat. I think ice would. It's not needed. It's a very smooth drink. So neat. Just getting into wanting to try something outside of an American whiskey or a bourbon or something along those lines. It's a really good step into that sweet side of what scotch can be.
If you're wanting to dip your toe into the scotch, I would start focusing on the single malts. Those are the ones that tend to be a little sweeter, obviously very, very low in the peatiness.
Yeah, and focus on the regions. Stay away from. And now I want to say Islay.
Isla.
But I know that's pronouncing it wrong. So just forgive me on that one. But stay away from that one. That's going to be your super smoked, peaty, briny, all that kind of stuff. They actually use peat moss to smoke the malt before they do the fermentation. That's what you're tasting. This is not.
No.
Not that way at all.
Very easy drinking.
All day long. This is easily something. Actually, this could be a daytime drinker too.
Poolside?
This could. You really could. It's light enough that it's not that heaviness that you normally have with like a whiskey or a bourbon, but you kind of really want that after dinner. This is so light and kind of fruity. Maybe.
I would not put a cube in this at all. I think it would kind of not ruin it, but
I don't think it would help it.
No, not at all. It wouldn't really open the flavors up any much more. I think this is perfect neat.
Yeah, and the fun part is I didn't pay attention to everyone, but I know I didn't when I went back for a second taste of this that night. Still didn't do it over a cube.
Nope.
I still did it neat. It's just that kind of a drink that it's better neat. Very nice. Next, this one's a little bit more interesting. So we were trying to do a range of different whiskeys, and that was one of the first things we talked about was the fact that it's going to be whiskeys, not just bourbons, not just scotches, it's going to be a little bit of everything. So we threw in a wild card.
Yeah,
and we got a
wild card.
We got a wild card. So this one, we actually have the bottle, is Blackened. This is an American whiskey that was inspired by Metallica.
So Dave Pickerel, he's a name that's well known in the whiskey industry. He spent some time at WhistlePig, and if I'm not mistaken, he was at Maker's Mark as well. So his thought process behind this bottle was kind of agitating the whiskey in the barrel.
Yes.
So they, what they did is they had put a number of speakers in the barrel house, and they played, was it eight
songs on repeat.
8 Metallica songs on repeat. And what they thought was it would agitate the bourbon, so it kind of touch everything, but it would the vibration would help bring out some of those other flavors deep in the cask. A lot of that's definitely thinking outside the box.
It's different. It's along the oceans, Jefferson's Oceans, which puts it on a boat, and the rocking and the weather and all that kind of stuff is supposed to add to it. Playing really loud music with apparently just like ridiculous speakers is going to agitate it. It's going to maybe speed up the aging process a touch. It's about, that's really what it's going to do. Maybe pull out a little bit of extra flavor. All right.
Let's go ahead and sample.
Throw a pour in here. Yeah, there we go.
I do like the bottle though.
It's
got that
interesting design.
Yep.
The sound wave type design. Yep. And I believe, if I recall correctly, I think it comes with the bottle. There is a website that you can go onto to find out what music your particular Metallica bottle, Blackened bottle, was played to. We went through the 8 songs. I thought I was an okay Metallica fan. Never heard any of those songs. So go figure. They
heavy bass.
They went deep into the tracks. 90 proof, so this is going to be a little bit stronger than the scotch we just tasted at the 86 proof. It is a blend, so they blend both bourbons and ryes together for this particular. Little heavier towards the bourbons, but there is going to be a little bit of a rye spice note to it.
The color is very light. Very light.
Which is odd. You would think it would pick up more color with that sound.
Pulling more out of the cask, but no, it's very, very light. Not much on the nose.
It's a very light nose. Honestly?
Almost makes you question it.
I'm not going to lie, but the note that I get is a little bit of a oaky, like tannin note, but it's really, really subtle.
Oh, let's give it a whirl.
Not a very oily.
No, not very oily.
No,
not
very
much
light.
legs. Very flavor on it is very like the nose and the color.
It's light.
It's very light.
It's very light.
There's not much to it.
Not a lot of rye. I mean, for saying, I don't know exactly what the build is and what the blend is, but I knew, like I said, I know it's a blend of both bourbons and ryes, heavier on the bourbons. It's light on the rye. There is a little of that
Citrus.
black tea note that sometimes I'm starting to get from ryes. I'm experimenting a little bit more into the ryes, thank you. Ever since the E.H. Taylor one.
Slowly tipping your toe in the water there. Dipping your toe in the water, I should say. There's a little bit of citrus to it. But again, I think overall the flavor is very, very faint.
Yeah, there is a zest.
Yeah, if it was that orange zest, it'd be very strong. But no, it's faint. There's a faint citrus note to it. Again, I like the story. I like the thinking outside the box of blaring heavy metal.
Yeah, yeah. Going back, if you do the chew a little bit, I do start to get a little more of the spice. I'm nitpicking here. It's very subtle. Everything about it is very subtle. I'm trying to dig into what this flavor is, and it's a very subtle. It's not bad. Probably not the first thing I'd reach for. I like like the story. I like the idea. It's got a taste to it. It's just, I don't know if that would be, it's not an everyday drinker to me. It's not a go-to flavor profile. It's a little too...
I don't get much of the bourbon to it.
The more I drink it, the more rye shows up in it. I'm not...
It tends to drift more to the whiskey for me.
Okay.
The rye, but I don't get much bourbon.
You're thinking that sweet brown sugar, caramel, those kind of notes, or the really fruity apples and things like. Yeah, that's not here.
No.
That is not in this whiskey. It was a fun add to a little collection as we toured what you can do with whiskeys. But
I mean, again, for them, thinking outside the box, kind of back to what you said about the Jefferson's Reserve. It's a nice way to hope in the thinking process of changing the flavor a little bit, trying to draw those notes out of that cask. Interesting, very interesting story.
And at some point, we'll throw up the songs. What was played here?
Yeah.
I don't remember them off the top of my head, but I do have the list of the songs that were played against it, and very interesting idea. You know, the idea sometimes doesn't always work out to a great finished product. So, not bad.
No, not bad.
So our next was another type of whiskey where we rolled into the ryes. That was one of the things.
Kevin's favorite.
We discussed this as Eric and I and a handful of other people. We were the hosts of the original meeting, and we discussed we wanted to do a variety of whiskeys. So we did the scotch, we did the bourbon, we did the American whiskey. This was I had to do the rye. Like, it's a whiskey. Got to do the rye. So we went with it.
But this goes back to the previous one we did.
Yeah, there's a connection.
Yep. Dave Pickerel, again, he did the Blackened, but he was also the master distiller at WhistlePig for a while.
PiggyBack. So there's a whole line of WhistlePig, and
I'll have to admit, WhistlePig's not my favorite.
Well, this was the very first WhistlePig I've ever had. But so they have a pretty big line, and they have some very expensive ryes. The Boss Hog is like $500 for that bottle. Apparently, this was one of Pickerel's ideas right before he left. Was PiggyBack. He wanted something that was very specific to bartenders. He wanted to have it, they were using like WhistlePig 10. That's a more expensive bottle right there, but they were using it for mixed drinks. So they wanted to make something that was a little bit on the lower price side, but that would stand up to any kind of a drink that you would want to include a rye in. This is 100% rye. It is 6 years, but I think we've mentioned before, anytime they put a label on there of 6 years of age, that means that's the youngest.
Yeah.
They put in, it's usually 6 to 8. Its average is around 7. The interesting one here is the proof. It is 96.56 proof. That was when Pickerel was born.
1956.
1956. Literally a throwback to the master distiller of the time of Pickerel. So pretty interesting idea. They're also a kind of a unique, they're a unique setup for whiskeys. They're based out of Vermont.
Yep.
And they source their whiskeys from Canada. And the places they source from use all Canadian, so it's Canadian rye that's blended into this. They actually do produce some of their own juice, but they almost always blend it with something else. They're pulling in a sourced that's not MGP, which is just unique for any place in America. They pull in Canadian
You got to
sourced.
think up there though, the temperature swings. If you're putting it in a barn, it's a pretty cold winter.
It's really cold. Yeah.
And then, probably a fairly mellow summer. So, I mean, there could be some drastic temperature swings that has a lot of change in the flavor
Yeah.
on that. So,
All right. Give her a
again,
pour.
pickerel, thinking outside the box there.
Yeah.
All right, you ready for this rye?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, it's got that rye right off the nose.
I didn't go there yet.
Right off the nose.
Not super oily. It's a lighter color. Not
Very
as
light.
light as the Scotch. But kind of similar to the blackened color.
You gonna have to hold your nose on this one?
No, it did the exact same thing that it did at the meeting. This is nothing against this because I do remember it getting better the more I, sat with the nose and relaxed around the fact that it's a rye. It's just there's a note there that I don't like.
It doesn't smell like your typical rye. I mean, most ryes for me they have that really spicy off the nose, and even that first taste is very spicy, almost more peppery. This is very sweet, which is not common.
So this is interesting. I got the same note off the blackened, that I'm getting a much stronger note of black tea,
Okay.
which I guess would make sense from pickerel. But there's a tea leaf, not a heavy pepper, nutmeg, baking spice. None of that. I'm not getting that.
No. Oh, I'm gonna give it another taste.
All right.
This is one of those. It tastes a lot better than it smells.
Well, that's not bad at all. That's even better than I remember from our meeting. That's not bad at all. It's
To the nose, it kind of makes you question.
yeah. Yes, the nose was a little more rough for me, but that is, whew.
Yeah, it's completely different. The nose to the palate is completely different.
Yeah, it goes from an odd note and a little bit of there's spice in the nose, and then there's almost a flavor, like a fruit touch in there.
Yeah.
Not strong, and I still get the more spice notes on the back of the tongue, things like that. All right, the tea's going, it's more of an herbal
Yeah.
with a lot of spice on the back of the tongue. So, rye, yes. Super that harsh rye that I think of when I think of rye. Not getting that.
No. No, even to the taste, it's still, for me, it's a little sweeter. I mean, it's very sweet to the nose. There's none of that sharp pepper.
No.
None.
But
Sweet
a decent
vermouth.
proof. I mean, 96.56. That's not a weak drink. So that's a pretty solid. It should hold up. It makes sense. It definitely would hold up in a mixed drink. I mean, that's kind of the reason why it was created.
Yep. That's the challenge these days when making bourbon whiskey cocktails, choosing what to use. For me, it's like, ooh, I don't know if I want to
Use your good stuff.
use my good stuff with ginger ale or some Coke. Ooh,
Yeah.
That is a challenge for me.
Yeah. See that? Well, I always try to have a big bottle of a drinker that I'm good with.
Mm-hmm.
A big bottle of Larceny, a big bottle of 101, Bullet, things like that. Yeah, those are
And we enjoy all those.
absolutely. I'll
Neat.
have them
On a
neat. I'll have them
cube,
on the
on a
rocks. But
But
if
those
you're
are-
gonna mix them, like you're not upset that you're missing something versus a really like a good bottle of something.
Nope. Yeah, I get very selective when it comes to wanting a bourbon cocktail and what I use. But yeah, the Bullets, the Larcenies, I'm okay.
Yeah, and they're solid
I'm okay donating a couple ounces to a cocktail.
to a cocktail. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. It's hard for me. It's not bad. I liked the Taylor so much better, surprisingly. I mean, for a rye, I just wasn't excited for the rye, but that was delicious. That was the super sweet notes that I kind of like off of a bourbon, mixed right into some more spicy notes that you normally would get from a rye. That was great. This is similar. It's not as sweet. You're not getting a bourbon sweetness off of this by any means, but it's not overwhelmingly spice, licorice.
No.
Those notes that I'm not a black licorice person.
But even most ryes, even like the Taylor or a Bullet rye, they are much, much darker. Almost to what you have here in your Infinity bottle. Much darker.
Way more bourbon.
Yeah. No, most of those have a darker color to it.
Is it the age? Just 6 years?
You know what?
Bullet probably
I
not
think
that much.
I think
older.
this reminds me more of a Canadian whiskey from a color standpoint.
Kind of is.
Yeah. Well, I know they
Vermont, Canada. I mean,
Yeah.
they're so close. There's probably that temperature, like you said, it's mild to cold.
very cold, I'm sure.
Versus, those hot summers to those cold winters that you get from a Tennessee, Kentucky region. There's just the range of cold. Cold doesn't necessarily help pull the color because the barrel
you need the heat.
tightens up.
Yeah, you need the heat. You need to expand it. But yeah, this has more of the Canadian whiskey color to it.
Yeah. Next one is, we're based out of Tennessee, so that was one of the things we did was it was a Tennessee whiskey. So most people think of Dickel
Or
Jack Daniels. It's kind of like the two big ones that people think of for the Tennessee whiskey, but the OG Green Brier, Nelson's
Green Brier.
Right.
So they were actually, prior to Prohibition, were actually the largest
whiskey distiller.
Tennessee whiskey
Right.
distiller. But once Prohibition hit, they decided to close down.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until probably about 8 years ago, 8 or 10 years ago, the great grandchildren of Charles Nelson, they decided to kind of revive the distillery, and they went back through and found the mash bills of some various whiskeys that they distilled prior to Prohibition and shortly after Prohibition, and decided to bring it back alive. And I would say I've personally purchased 2 bottles of this, and I've really enjoyed it. And I'm not typically a Tennessee whiskey person. I'm more of a Kentucky bourbon.
Apparently, in like the whiskey world, is a little bit of a controversy. So Tennessee whiskey is basically, for the most part, bourbon. But they take one extra step.
The charcoal.
They filter it through charcoal. It's the only difference. As soon as you do that, then it would be finished bourbon. So they just decided, we're not going to call it finished bourbon. We're just going to call it Tennessee whiskey. Like all Tennessee whiskeys have the exact same thing.
Slightly mellower.
That
in my opinion.
Yep, absolutely. They use a sugar maple charcoal that they filter this through. So it's going to pull out some of those sharper notes. It's going to just it just mellows everything out. Jack Daniels, and we'll get to Jack Daniels at some point, but they do it through feet of charcoal.
I think theirs is, but it filters twice.
The Gentleman Jack is the second they do. That's where they do 3 more feet for Gentleman Jack. That's kind of the only difference. It's Gentleman Jack is Jack Daniels filtered just a little more. All right.
Already from the nose, this is more in my wheelhouse than the WhistlePig.
Already darker. Not a whole lot of oil sitting on there. Which I guess makes sense. A charcoal filter would probably pull a lot of those oils off. Yeah, that is a whole lot more in that bourbon category of whiskey. There's the sweet notes.
Very sweet. Caramel, some cinnamon. All kind of falls in that wheelhouse. That caramel, cinnamon.
Yeah.
A little bit of vanilla.
I got the caramel. I don't have the cinnamon yet. It's a fruit. It's not cherry and it's not apple. There's a fruit there though. Interesting.
No, there's a lot.
I want to say it's apple, but it's not. It's a little different. All right, I'm gonna give that a taste.
Again, I'm not a big Tennessee whiskey person, but
That's
again,
nice.
I've purchased 2 bottles of this personally, and I do
That's
enjoy
nice.
this one.
That is caramel, a little oak. Very little. There's a note of oak in there, so you know it's definitely got something in there. There's no age statement at all on the bottle, but they have rumored that it's somewhere in the 4-year-old, 5, 6, kind of they blend some together. Wow, that's neat. As I sat on that, like the finish, a little bit more chocolate. Did you catch that? Super sweet. So much sweeter than anything not the fruity light that the Scotch was.
No.
This is that more bourbon type sweet of the caramel brown sugar-ish range. I'm going to say a little bit more towards the caramel side.
I get a lot of oak on the finish. A lot.
Yeah, there's a tannin.
It lingers.
Yeah. There's a little bit of spice in the middle of that, though.
Yeah, about halfway through the swallow,
Yeah.
there's definitely a spice to it.
It's sweet at the very beginning, and then there's a baking spice of some sort right in the middle of that. It could be the oak, like the tannin note that pulls off of that, and then I still come that finished. It slides back to chocolate for me.
I get a faint apple. faint.
Is that what that fruit was? I don't know. I can't
Not
tell.
on the nose. It's on the finish for me.
It dries quickly. That's the interesting. I mean, again, going back to the fact that there's not a lot of oil here. So, because of that filtering, it gets right, like it goes from that sweet straight into that more dry. I'm still just going to say oak, that charred oak note right in the middle of it. It's filtered through charcoal, so why not? And then there is a sweeter finish.
I think if you're a fan of Tennessee whiskeys, this is one you need to get.
And
$30.
$30?
$30 to $35.
Yeah, $30, right in line with most of Jack Daniel's type price lines, things like that. And it's a little different.
I enjoy, if I were to put this up to the original,
The number 7?
number 7, I would choose
This is better.
I would choose this over that.
Number 7 always seems sharp. It's just sharp to me.
Yeah, and I find that goes back to the your mixing whiskeys.
Okay.
I think it goes back to everyone's pretty comfortable with Jack and Cokes.
You want something a little sharper to add a flavor to it.
Yep.
I could see that.
But if you're wanting a Tennessee whiskey to sip on, obviously we'll get to those in some other episodes. But I think from the this one's. I think if you're gonna go that route, this is a good one to buy, especially for the price point.
Yeah, totally worthwhile, and it's going to have some of those sweet notes because it's a wheated whiskey.
That's the other thing. There's no rye. There's no
it's
rye.
not a rye. There is corn, wheat, barley. That's it. Similar to a lot of what Buffalo Trace does, where they do their wheated whiskeys or bourbons.
The Tennessee whiskeys, this one substitutes the wheat for the rye.
Yep.
Which would explain the sweeter.
Right. Gala apple.
Yep.
Yes, it's not that like crazy, ridiculous apple smell. It's that little bit muted, not quite like it's not bitter like a Granny Smith or anything, but it's like that muted
There's
Gala
some that have
apple.
that Granny Smith. There's some that have the caramel apple. This just has that faint apple. Faint, very faint.
We used to do Gala apples, and that is exactly what it is. That's a good buy and a good example of what a Tennessee whiskey is. Yeah, it's an interesting bottle. That was one of the things they tried to recreate the bottle to look like it did pre-Prohibition, with the exception that there's certain laws now that they had to kind of change the label. Outside of that, they made it look like a 1900 bottle.
Yeah.
Really cool. All right, for this last one, I'm gonna let you do a lot of the talking because this was your pick.
Yep. So this next one is going to be Boone County. I grew up in the northern Kentucky, Cincinnati area, and I was actually given a bottle of the Boone County, I think it was 33. That was their original bottle. Very delicious. But down here in the Tennessee parts, it's very hard to come by. But now they've got their own bottle. It's no longer sourced. I was able to find it at only one liquor store. I've checked a few places, and there was only one here in the area that had it.
Had to do some hunting.
It was the Boone County Small Batch. I actually phoned back home to my brother, who is a big bourbon connoisseur, and he says, you can't go wrong. He's like, grab a bottle of that. So I did, and it was actually at our last whiskey club meeting. It was the second bottle finished. So I think it was a hit.
I don't think a lot of people had heard of it or had any experience with it. So it's always fun to, it's the whole point of this channel and those meetings is to try something new.
Yep. Good color. Much darker than the Blackened and
Yes.
the WhistlePig.
Yes. Ooh, there's more oil on that one.
More oil. It's definitely got a good sweetness to the nose, but it falls more to the nose, more along the bourbon than the Nelson Green Brier, which was a Tennessee whiskey.
It's sweet. It's kind of what I get off the nose. There's not a fruit that I can pick up necessarily. There's not maybe a little caramel. It's not really brown sugar.
No, I don't
Sweet.
think any brown sugar. Corn, given the mash bill, but that's
True. All right, I'm about to give that a taste. Oh, interesting. Got a little more burn off that first sip
yeah.
than I have gotten from anything else. Any idea what the proof is on that?
I do not. I want to say it's probably in the mid-90s though.
I know it was one of the higher ones because we did try to stage them up in proof, figuring that was going to, you're usually going to get more flavors as you proof up. The Blackened and the Macallan were around the same proof, but we knew the Macallan was going to be just so subtle. We started there. So we sampled this in the exact same order that we sampled there.
So I do know it's more of they blend like WhistlePig does, and the range is actually a much greater range. It's actually 5 to 14 years.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yep. And again, in complete honesty here, their initial stuff was their first bottle was actually sourced while they had their stuff in the barrels aging.
Yep. Makes sense.
But this particular one that we're sampling, it ranges from 5 to 14 years. So
And this is all their juice or some source?
No, it's all their juice.
All their juice.
All their juice.
Nice.
And I think I paid, it's right around $50 for this bottle.
I will say this is the hardest bottle to find information on. Trying to just kind of look for thoughts, notes, MSRP, anything. I got nothing. Mash builds, blends. I think it's very regional, right? I mean, isn't that kind of the point?
Yeah,
it was really right in that southern Ohio, Kentucky region. It's starting to come outside of there,
so
but
now we're just recently it's been available here in Tennessee.
okay.
Which, if you're wondering where we are located,
Just outside Nashville.
just outside of Nashville. So,
A little bit of caramel. There's a really light fruit, maybe an apple, but very light. It's really just, but there's a little spice in there. For saying that, it's not a wheated bourbon. So there's some rye blended into this.
yep.
There's something in the mid palate where there's a little bit more of a spice than you'd get off of a Weller or Buffalo Trace or something like that. Yeah, it kind of has it's got the 3 stages. That initial sweet, a quick spice in the middle, finish is sweet, fruity, something along those lines. Goes away pretty quick. It's odd. There's not a long linger to. I mean, there's still a little bit of that spice that lingers and a little bit of that sweet that lingers, but it doesn't. It's not a long finish to it.
If you hold your mouth a little bit, I mean, the whole kind of mixing it around with your tongue or kind of aerating it, it stays sweet the whole time. There is no. I don't get anything other than sweetness. There's no ethanol burn to the nose or to the palate.
I didn't get the ethanol burn on the nose. The very first sip, I did get it on the palate, right at the beginning, and then which I was surprised, honestly. I mean, the fact that we had gone through this is our 5th sample, I was not expecting any feel from there. But now, a little more apple.
I kind of find with every time there's kind of that apple note, there's a little bit of cinnamon. I feel like there's a caramel kind of.
Yeah, there's sweetness.
Sneaks in there too.
Yeah, it's not complex. There's not like multiple layers or picking up a lot of things. It's
the whole sampling kind of falls in that palate. Everything's very subtle. There's no complex flavors. There's not.
Yeah, you're right.
Cherries, this berry, this leather, this and that. It's all very. Everything was very sweet, and it was usually like 1, 2, or 3 things.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the Macallan's very sweet, fruit, sherry. Yeah, you're right. Everything kind of is not, none of these were very complex. Again, a great assortment of beginner whiskeys. I mean, it's kind of that's the point. You want to go through and kind of get a feel for some whiskeys. Those are all great beginner whiskeys. They're not going to be overpowering. They're not, barrel proof at 130,
no,
or that are going to just wipe some people out. They're
going to scare people off.
Yeah, they're not that overly smoky scotch, the Islay. I know I'm saying that wrong. Sorry.
I think this lineup is very more on the beginner side.
Absolutely. And a great intro, great first meeting for our chapter. Yep. So, worked out.
Well, we've enjoyed this tasting.
Yeah, it was a great little reminisce to go through all these whiskeys again.
But if you enjoyed it, we ask that you hit the like button.
And while you're down there, if you could subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you get notified every time we post a new video.
We look forward to seeing you in the next episode.
Thanks very much for watching. Cheers.